Fox 10 News and WSFA 12 News present Alabama's District 2 Republican Congressional Debates. Now, presented by the Mobile Chamber of Commerce from Government Plaza in downtown Mobile. Candidates Dick Brubaker and Caroline Dobson. Sponsored by All In Credit Union and Southern Cancer Center.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mobile County Commission Chambers. I'm Lenny Slagan from Fox 10 News in Mobile.
And I'm Valerie Lawson from WSFA in Montgomery.
The new Alabama map for District 2 will impact communities in both of our viewing areas. Our TV stations, WSFA and Fox 10 here in Mobile, are teaming up once more so that you can hear directly from the candidates running for this seat.
And we started with a crowded political forum in February featuring a field of candidates wanting to represent the district. None received more than 50% of the vote, meaning voters will head back to the polls on April 16th for a runoff before the general election in November.
So this debate will feature the Republican candidates in the runoff, former Alabama State Senator Dick Brubaker and attorney Caroline Dobson. Thank you guys both for being here.
And we will have each candidate introduce themselves, and they will have 1 minute to do so. And we will start in alphabetical order with Dick Brubaker. Mr. Brubaker.
Thank you very much. My name is Dick Brubaker. I've lived my entire life in this district, raised 5 boys, and run a business. Some of the people in this room and some of the people watching on TV, I think your lives might be a little bit better because I was in the legislature. When the autism insurance bill got stuck in the Senate, the autism insurance bill got passed because I was there to push it out. If you've taken advantage of any of the school choice initiatives, there's the virtual school bill, the charter bill, the Accountability Act. I sponsored some of those bills. The first charter school bill to ever pass the state Senate, I passed. When the State Department of Education tried to outlaw homeschooling, I wrote into the code the strongest protections for homeschools and private schools in the country. Send me to Congress, and I'll do even better. Thank you.
Mrs. Dobson, you have 1 minute.
Good evening. My name is Caroline Dobson, and I'm running to fight for Alabama families. I was the first Republican to qualify in this race, but I'm not a politician. I grew up on a farm in Monroe County. I now live in Montgomery with my husband and 2 girls, where I practice real estate law and serve on the Forestry Commission. I'm proud to be raising my family in South Alabama, but the future of our kids is at stake. Whether it's closing the border, supporting our military, balancing the budget, securing energy independence, or fighting against woke culture, there's real work to be done, and we don't need to send a retired career politician. If you send me, I will stand tall with President Trump against the left, but otherwise work hard to restore our freedoms and protect our rights. I'm the strong conservative with a backbone who can defeat the Democrats in November and fight for conservative values in Washington.
Thank you. And now that the candidates have had an opportunity to reintroduce themselves, we will get right to the question. A reminder, each candidate has 1 minute to answer. There will be time for a rebuttal. And to the audience, please silence your phones if you haven't done so already. No pictures will be taken during this time. And we also ask that you hold your applause until the very end of the debate so our candidates have an opportunity to get through all of the questions tonight. Starting with our first question, artificial intelligence. It will fundamentally change how we live and work, and some argue that AI is so powerful that we need new government regulations to determine how it is being used. Others argue that heavy regulation would hurt American innovation and give our adversaries like China an advantage. What comes closer to your view, and as a member of Congress, how would you approach AI? Mr. Brubaker, we'll start with you first.
Thanks. There's always a lot of fear when new technology comes out, but I think on AI, caution has got to be the byword. 28,000 people in the AI industry, including Jeff Hinton, who's sort of the godfather of AI at Google, have been warning that we need a 6-month moratorium on new development of large language models until we know whether it's a real risk that AI becomes AGI and might actually run away and we'll lose control of it. But we need to do better with AI than we did with COVID. Stanford, Princeton, MIT did a transparency study on the 100 largest AI companies, OpenAI, Google, Meta, and with 100 being the most transparent, one the least, the median score was 36. There's very little transparency in the development of AI technologies, and that's why people are afraid of it. We need to get this out in the open so people act out of knowledge, not out of fear.
And Ms. Dobson, how would you approach AI?
Well, AI has tremendous economic opportunities, but there's also a huge downside. It's a lot like nuclear technology. We have limitless power, but we also have atomic weapons. So we have to approach AI with the knowledge that big tech and liberal media are going to try to harness AI to use it to suppress conservative thought. My first and foremost concern is Alabama families. I'm running to fight for Alabama families. I've got 2 children, and I'm concerned about the harm that AI can cause children. And not just the harm that we think of, that's out there that is so visible, but also the harm to their development. I grew up in rural Monroe County with 3 television channels, and I'm concerned that AI is going to preclude our children from learning how to think critically. I'm also concerned, again, about the suppression of conservative thought, so any approach to AI needs to be balanced with those interests in mind.
Thank you. Mr. Brubaker, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Well, my response would be that AI isn't going to be the same sort of political manipulator. At least that's not the fear. At least in political manipulation of social media, there's some human out there controlling it. The danger of AI with super intelligent AGI is that the manipulation will be done out of the control of any human. And that's why we need the 6-month moratorium until we know where we are. And if we establish the right laws, we can shut down the server farms by force if necessary, if that's what it takes. But we've got to protect ourselves.
Ms. Dobson, your rebuttal.
I think we saw recently with Google that there is a bias, a liberal bias in artificial intelligence. And I think it's very important that we as conservatives fight against liberal bias, which is prevalent everywhere. Whether this is voter interference or indoctrination of our youngest citizens, we have to be concerned about the liberal bias and big tech using that to suppress conservative thought.
The next question, inflation continues to negatively impact many Americans. Gas prices are high, food costs are at 40-year highs, mortgage rates have increased. What do you think needs to happen to lower the cost of these things? And we'll start with you, Ms. Dobson, 1 minute.
Yes, well, inflation is hurting every Alabama family. For the average family of 4 like mine, we're paying $950 a month more for just basic living costs than we were when Biden took office. There are 4 things that we can do to immediately impact inflation. 1 is cut government spending, which we must do. 2nd is lower taxes. 3rd is deregulate. And 4th is to unleash American energy independence. Working backwards, we first need to become energy independent again. We were under President Trump, and it's important that we send someone from this district who is going to work with President Trump to ensure that our energy is American-made again. It's also important that we lower taxes. Taxes are the cause of a lot of the inflationary experience and budget that we're experiencing. So it's so important that we also focus on cutting government spending. Spending is keeping inflation high and interest rates high, and that's hurting Alabama families.
Mr. Brubaker, what do you think needs to happen to lower costs? 1 minute.
Everywhere I've gone in this district, other than the border, the thing people talk about most is food inflation. In Alabama, while the general inflation rate's about 10%, food inflation is over 30%. Eggs are twice as expensive as they were a year ago. Milk, butter, sugar, eggs, all up between 20 and 30%. It hurts Alabama families. And the sad part about this is most of it is driven by energy costs, all in the name of green energy and saving the planet. China burned more coal last year than in any year in their history. Same goes for India. It is time for Alabama families to stop paying the fare so green energy elites can make more money. The time has come for us to instead of putting the brakes on U.S. energy production, is to open it up. You bring fuel prices down, food prices will follow them very quickly. The major factor in the increase in food prices in Alabama is the cost of delivery. When Joe Biden took office, gallon of gas costs $1.86. Now it's north of $3.50. That's why food prices are up.
Thank you. Ms. Dobson, 30 seconds.
Yes, well, in addition to energy independence, as I earlier mentioned, and tax cuts, again, we have to decrease government spending, and we also have to deregulate. You know, the cost of building a new home, for instance, 27% of the cost of building a new home is directly related to compliance with federal regulations. So our regulatory state is a leading factor in causing inflation and crushing American and Alabama families.
Thank you.
You both are doing great with staying on time. I just want to remind you about the color coding with the time count. Green means you're in the clear. Yellow means it's almost time to wrap up your answer. And red is yes, you need to wrap it up. Mr. Brubaker, you do have a rebuttal for your rebuttal.
The second factor of inflation, energy is one side. The other side is government spending. We have, ever since COVID started, the federal government has been on a spending spree. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. You are never going to lower the general inflation rate until we rein in big government. Government needs to be smaller. We need to let families keep more of their money. And right now, the trend in the federal system is to raise taxes. We have got to rein in government spending. We can lower people's taxes, and they'll be better off.
Next question deals with immigration. Securing the border is a major topic in American politics today. Some are calling the situation at our southern border an invasion, saying that something must be done. Do you think there is a crisis at the southern border, and should Congress take action to stop illegal immigration? Mr. Brubaker, your answer first.
In the last month that we have complete figures for, 400,000 illegal entries on the southern border alone, not counting the northern border. That's a city the size of Pittsburgh. It's completely unsustainable for this country to support that kind of illegal immigration. The danger to American families is obvious. The danger of terrorism, the danger of crime. We all know the sad story of Laken Riley, a young woman murdered by someone who had been arrested twice and wasn't supposed to be here in the first place. The federal government is failing in its obligation to protect its citizens. The last thing is the fentanyl crisis. All of the illegal fentanyl, according to the FBI, is coming across the southern border. The Chinese make the precursor chemicals, the Mexican cartels spin it into fentanyl, and it's brought in on the backs of illegal immigrants. 200 Americans a day are dying of fentanyl poisoning. If the Iranians killed 200 Americans a day, we'd be at war. The time has come for the government to close the border and deport people who are here illegally. Secure the border.
Thank you. Ms. Dobson, your response. What action should Congress take to stop illegal immigration?
Yes, no, look, this is a full-on invasion. I mean, when the National Guard in Texas is overrun by illegal aliens, this is an invasion. We need to close the border, build the wall, send everyone home who's here illegally, and I'm including children who are born to illegal aliens because they should not be entitled to American citizenship. And we should also enforce President Trump's stay in Mexico policy. It's the crime, it's the drugs, it's the enemy nationals, it's also the non-taxpayers who are going to be relying on our social services. It's also voter fraud. You know, look, the Biden administration has a goal. They want as many new Democrats as they can register. And here there's a distinction between the two candidates in this race because my opponent voted with every Democrat in the state Senate to reduce penalties for falsifying voter ID cards. We need someone who's going to take the border seriously and also take election fraud seriously because interference is rampant.
Mr. Brubaker, your response.
First of all, it's important to understand what we're talking about. We can't just close the border. $2 billion in American trade crosses the southern border every day. $2 billion. We can't unemploy tens of thousands of Americans. What we can do is put however many people on the border it takes to let legitimate trade cross both ways and keep illegal immigrants out. And, you know, my opponent's been lying about my record since we started this, and that's one more.
Ms. Dobson, 30 seconds.
Mr. Brubaker did vote to reduce penalties for voter ID fraud. And also, I think it's significant that he's talking about the fentanyl crisis now, because 7 years ago he tried to downplay the opioid crisis and criticize those who were concerned about that. Now, 7 years later, we have thousands of Alabamians who have died of fentanyl overdose, including my godbrother in Montgomery. I don't know that we can trust that judgment in Washington, D.C.
Our next question deals with health care. With millions of Americans uninsured and millions more paying high rates of care deemed unsatisfactory, how do we solve the health care crisis in America? Ms. Dobson, we start with you.
Yes, no, I grew up again in rural Monroe County, and just last year, Monroe County closed its maternity ward. There is a healthcare crisis in this district, and it's impacting not only the elderly and their access to reliable health care, but also the young people. You know, brain drain is a problem in this district, and it's hard to get young people to move back to our small towns in this district and create businesses and take the jobs that we need them to take when we don't have access to reliable health care. I'll tell you what I won't do, and that is support the Democrats' move to make Medicare for all. That will only disadvantage our senior citizens. For those who are currently on Medicare or about to receive Medicare, we need to ensure that their benefits are protected. But for those my age and younger, it's time for us to roll up our sleeves, stop playing politics, and come to the reality that the money's not going to be there, and we have got to come up with a solution that actually works for health care to address this crisis.
Mr. Brubaker.
When it comes to health care, there are three tests. Is it affordable, is it accessible, and is the quality there? That's the questions we ought to be asking. The problem with expanding Medicare into the coverage gap is that while these are hourly wage earners, a great many of them are provided private insurance by their employers. Now, if the state covers that coverage gap by expanding Medicare, we already know what business people will do. They will drop their private coverage because the state's giving coverage for free. The problem with that is only 15% of Alabama doctors are accepting Medicare and Medicaid patients. So what they will lose is the accessibility that those workers have now, making them worse off. The solution to the health care crisis is to go back to the Affordable Care Act and rework it. If there's one thing that's been proven about the Affordable Care Act, that it hasn't been affordable, and it has certainly failed the accessibility test.
Thank you. Ms. Dobson.
Yes, another way to improve Medicare is to decrease inflation. That means decrease government spending, provide tax cuts, ensure that there is not an added tax burden on our employers so that they can provide better options to those in our communities who need health care. We also have to ensure that we're not increasing taxes on hospitals. Again, my opponent, when he was in the state legislature, voted to increase taxes on hospitals, voted to impose a tax on nursing beds. We don't need that in Washington, D.C.
30 seconds rebuttal.
I think that the problem the legislature's had is deciding who they want to benefit. It is undeniable that expanding Medicare through the coverage gap will benefit large hospital groups, UAB, organizations like that. But again, for the people actually seeking coverage, you're going to drive them away from their family physicians into emergency rooms to receive clinic care. That's not a solution.
Thank you.
And on to our next question now. With the current Congress on track to pass even fewer bills than the infamous Do-Nothing Congress of the late 40s, how would you justify the salaries and benefits being paid to members of Congress who seem to accomplish so little on behalf of the American people? Should there be greater accountability and consequences for a lack of productivity? Mr. Brubaker, your response for 60 seconds.
Well, not based on just productivity as defined by how many bills you pass. One thing I did learn in government is there are really only two things that government can do. They can tell you can't do something you're doing now, or they can take things away from you through taxation. And passing more bills generally means making government bigger and more expensive. While I definitely believe we need more accountability, I think you're more likely to achieve that through term limits and giving the voters a real chance to elect new people with fresh eyes and fresh ideas than you are by rewarding congressmen for simply passing more bills. If there's one thing for sure, especially when it comes to federal legislation, quantity does not have anything to do with quality. As a matter of fact, I think people's property and personal freedoms are safer when Congress is not in session at all. Thank you.
Ms. Dobson.
Yes, I think our founders intended for our government leaders to be citizen statesmen, not career politicians. And I think it's so important that we have a constitutional amendment requiring term limits. Along with that, I think what is leading to so much frustration with our government right now is the regulatory state and the overreach of the executive branch. It's so important that we increase our Republican majority. It's so important that we keep this seat, given the razor-thin margin in Congress right now that Republicans have, so that we can rein in the excesses of the executive branch. You know, for every one regulation that President Trump promulgated, he did away with 2. On the other hand, we have President Biden, who has issued executive order after executive order that has burdened the American public and hurt Alabama families. I'm running to fight for Alabama families, and that means reining in the executive branch, which Congress has got to focus on.
Mr. Brubaker.
It is true, on the border alone, Biden's issued 93 executive orders. Every one had the effect of opening the southern border further. Probably the worst executive order he issued was the one repealing Trump's regulatory limit executive order. There is nothing that stifles the economy more than encouraging government regulators to be more active. But the only way you're going to increase accountability among congressmen is by term limiting them. The power of the incumbency is just very great.
And Ms. Dobson, you have the final word on this topic.
Yes, well, again, look, the Biden administration is trying to regulate everything from the type of car that you buy to how you can use a mud puddle on your property, and it's time for that to stop. I've been endorsed by the Alabama Farmers Federation, largely because they know that my priority is going to Washington, D.C. to fight the overregulation of the left and to ensure that we codify President Trump's regulatory Bill of Rights to protect private individuals and small business owners throughout this district.
Gun violence is a national concern. Depending on your party, there is a push for more gun control, in particular for semi-automatic weapons. Do you support increased gun control laws? Ms. Dobson?
No. Gun laws only hurt law-abiding citizens, and red flag laws are a violation of due process. Look, with the Biden administration and what they've done to our economy and the way they've flung open our southern border and the illegal aliens that are roaming through our country, crime is on the rise, and that's hurting Alabama families. But the solution is not more gun laws. What we have to do is support our law enforcement to treat criminals like criminals, to take guns out of the hands of our criminals and actually lock them away, lock the criminals away, that is. I have been endorsed by the sheriff and former sheriff of Mobile County, the district attorney and former district attorney of Mobile County, as well as the sheriffs of Washington, Clark, and Butler counties, because they know that I'm the candidate who's going to be tough on crime and also protect your Second Amendment rights.
Mr. Brubaker, do you have a solution for gun violence?
There's no such thing as gun violence. Guns don't cause crime any more than pencils cause misspelled words. It all depends on who has them. We have laws, you could stack them this high, about why people who have committed crimes aren't allowed to have guns. Problem is they have them anyway. Restricting the right of people who care about law and order to own guns is just going to make the situation worse. You're going to take the people's fundamental right to defend their persons, their property, and their families away from them in the name of doing something about a problem that we already know won't be effective. If the gun laws we had against felons having firearms were enforced now, well, you wouldn't read about felons killing people nearly every weekend. If there's one thing we know won't work, it's more gun laws. The Veterans for Trump endorsed me because they know my number one stand for 12 years in the state legislature and every public office I've ever had is on individual liberty. That includes the Second Amendment.
Thank you. Ms. Dobson, 30 seconds.
Yes, again, I will stand firm for Second Amendment rights and will never support any new gun laws or red flag laws. We also have to treat criminals like criminals. My opponent, when he was in the state legislature, supported a bill that would have allowed parole for life-sentenced habitual offenders. And we need to be tougher on crime and treat criminals like the criminals that they are.
Thank you, Mr. Brubaker.
That was a bill on people that were convicted of repeated Class C misdemeanors, not violent crimes. But the point is that, to get back to the issue at hand, when you're talking about people's safety, the emphasis should be on letting law-abiding people protect their lives, their persons, and their property, not on solutions that just sound good in media, but we already know don't work. If felons obeyed gun laws, felons wouldn't have guns.
All right, thank you both. We have reached the moment where we get to take a quick break. So we'll continue our election 2024 District 2 Republican debate in 2 minutes.
And welcome back to our special election 2024 District 2 Republican debate. This event is sponsored by our 2 stations, WALA in Mobile and WSFA in Montgomery, along with the Mobile Chamber and the Alabama Republican Party. Tonight, we are hearing from the candidates in the April 16th runoff. Let's continue with the questions.
And resuming with those questions, it's time to talk about the state's economy. Alabama's economy relies heavily on automotive, aerospace, and shipbuilding industries, all of which are located in Alabama's new District 2. How will you support the port, Austal, and Airbus? Mr. Brubaker, your response first.
Thank you. Well, one of the things my opponent has been gigging me on is when I said that one of President Trump's early tariff policies would have hurt the port. It would have raised the initial tariff that he suggested would have raised the cost of each Airbus plane $10 million, not to mention the damage it would do to other transplants like Mercedes and Hyundai. And the reason was it didn't make an exception for imported assemblies that were going into Alabama-built airplanes. The first thing we need to do to protect the industry in Mobile is we need to protect the people that are already there through good economic fair trade policies. President Trump ended up changing his tariff proposal because people like me complained about it. The other thing is the infrastructure projects are absolutely crucial. Widening the ship channel, the Bayway Bridge, the West Alabama Causeway, all of this are appropriate uses for federal money, and if the port's going to grow, it's got to happen.
Thank you. Ms. Dobson, how would you support the port, Austal, and Airbus?
Yes, well, whether I'm talking to poultry producers in East Alabama or timber mill workers in West Alabama, everyone recognizes the opportunity that the port provides. It's the second fastest growing port in the nation, and with the intermodal capabilities, with the new airport and the port extension to Montgomery, which is also in this district, it's tremendously important that we fight for the port to complete the rail line, which will eliminate the need for 250 18-wheelers from I-65. That will make travel safer for Alabama families and also alleviate a lot of the wear and tear on our infrastructure. When it comes to Austal, look, our military is lagging behind our enemies in the production of materiel and equipment. The Chinese Navy is bigger than ours now, and it's so important that we fight for Austal to ensure that we can catch up with our enemies with the Littoral Combat Ship Program, which my opponent has criticized.
Thank you. Mr. Brubaker, you have 30 seconds to respond.
All right. When you're talking about economic development, it's not just a one-shot deal. It's not necessarily a zero-sum game. The $110 million Montgomery's spending on a container port just north of the town on the river isn't going to be worth very much if we can't get the containers out of Mobile. So the great thing about the economic development projects in Mobile is they benefit the whole state. And that's why it's time to quit arguing about earmarks and fund those projects.
And Ms. Dobson, your last 30 seconds on this topic.
Yes, it's so important that we advocate for Austal, not only because our military needs the equipment, because it provides 1,900 jobs here in the Mobile community. It's also important that we advocate for Airbus. By the end of 2025, Mobile is going to be the 4th largest commercial airspace manufacturing city in the world. So it's very important that whoever represents this district is advocating for the Port, Austal, and Airbus, has all of those interests in mind to further opportunities here in Alabama.
Let's talk about education. What can be done to improve our schools? We face growing challenges from other countries. How do we make sure we are leaders in this area? Ms. Dobson, you have 1 minute.
Yes, well, if you're a parent like me, my husband and I are raising our daughters here in Alabama, and we are so concerned not only about accessibility to education, but also the content of that education. When I became a parent, the story of Hannah from the Bible never became truer to me. Hannah taking Samuel to the temple. We are stewards of these beautiful gifts from God, and we need, as parents, to have control over the education they're receiving. We need to be the final determiners of the best education to equip them, and that's why education needs to be determined on a local basis. I'm so grateful for the Alabama State Legislature and the CHOOSE Act they've passed, but we have got to dramatically downsize our Federal Department of Education. The average Federal Department of Education employee makes $100,000 a year, which is twice what the average Alabama teacher makes. We have got to send that money to the states so that we can use it locally.
Thank you. Mr. Brubaker?
On education, the closer you move decision-making to the local school boards and the parents of the children receiving that education, the better off you're going to be. Step one should be to eliminate the United States Department of Education. Ever since Jimmy Carter created that department, the quality of American public schools by any reasonable measure has gone down. The money that's being spent on the U.S. Department of Education right now needs to be block granted back to local school boards based on student population. That will give local school board members talking to local parents a way to come up with local solutions to local problems. When I was in the legislature in Montgomery, we constantly tried to push authority away from Montgomery back to local school boards. The other big part of this is school choice. I passed the first charter bill out of the state Senate. The Virtual School Act, the Accountability Act, all of those. I chaired the Education Committee, and if I hadn't been there, they probably wouldn't have passed. Giving parents more choices will improve schools.
Ms. Dobson,
And I
30
made it.
seconds. 30 seconds.
Yes, again, even within this district, there are so many different circumstances and situations, and so it is so important that that funding and choice be localized. That said, we still need a federal apparatus to ensure that our schools throughout the nation are free of critical race theory, that girls' sports are for girls only, and that we are teaching civics in our schools throughout the nation, because we as a country will fail if we're not unified in believing that America is the greatest force for good in the world.
Thank you. Mr. Brubaker?
I disagree that we need a federal apparatus to govern schools. Schools have always been a state function. They need to remain so. The problem with the U.S. Department of Education, whether it's the intrusion of LGBT agenda into school curriculum or transgender issues being interjected into girls' sports, that stuff is being developed in Washington, not in the states. If we return these issues to the states where they belong, we wouldn't have to argue about them.
Thank you.
Our next question deals with the ban on TikTok. Several influencers in Alabama have joined in protests in Washington calling for Congress not to ban TikTok. What is your take on banning TikTok? Mr. Brubaker, you have 60 seconds.
TikTok is a Chinese-owned app that has 135 million American users, just Americans. And 6 out of 10 teenagers in the United States claim to be active TikTok users. The problem is that the TikTok algorithm is tilted toward extreme and even violent content. A study done in 2021 on extremist content on YouTube showed that the TikTok algorithm became suggested content 70% of the extremist content on other platforms like YouTube. This is damaging young people. Study after study have shown the negative effect of social media on teenagers, especially on issues like girls' body image and the increase in eating disorders among young women who are active on TikTok. It is time for TikTok to either be sold to an American company or thoroughly regulated, and not just TikTok.
Ms. Dobson, do you believe TikTok needs to be banned?
Yes, I do. And I will say to anyone viewing tonight, if you have TikTok on your phone or your children have TikTok on your phone, please delete it immediately. It is a direct conduit to the Chinese Communist Party. It is being used to indoctrinate and influence opinions, interfere with elections, and it's also supplying data of all kinds to the CCP. What we need to do, though, in banning TikTok is we need to ensure that any legislation that bans TikTok is very limited in scope so that it does not infringe upon First Amendment rights and that it does not, cannot be manipulated to suppress conservative thought or suppress other conservative social media platforms. I think what we fail to recall is that President Trump had banned TikTok and WeChat and ByteDance. And we need to send someone to Washington who will work with President Trump, not bash President Trump.
Mr. Brubaker, your final thought.
The problem with Chinese-owned media operating to 135 million Americans is their ability to manipulate content. The Chinese have long had a system they call asymmetrical warfare. The fentanyl was made with Chinese precedent chemicals is part of it. TikTok could very easily be turned into another, not to mention the personal information that site collects on 135 million Americans, most of them minors. It's time for Congress to get serious about regulation.
And your response?
Yes, again, with over an estimated 170 million TikTok users in the United States, it's time for Congress to address this issue. But unlike HB 686, we need to be very careful that any legislation that addresses TikTok does so in a way that it cannot be applied to other social media platforms that are conservative or be used to suppress or silence conservative thinkers.
Due to congressional inaction, many federal agencies often enact ideologically driven regulations that many chambers of commerce say can hurt businesses. The Biden administration is reportedly considering several thousand regulatory changes this year. Do you have a problem with this, and what should be the solution, Ms. Dobson?
Yes, and we I guess kind of addressed this earlier to some extent, but our executive branch is out of control. In 2020, Trump issued the Regulatory Bill of Rights, which established basic safety guidelines to protect private individuals against executive agency overreach. Those included rules of evidence for agency proceedings, as well as establishing a burden of proof for agency proceedings as well. I think we saw most recently, just in the last few days, where the Biden administration and its newest emission standards and truck and transportation fleets trying to control the types of vehicles that we can buy, which again just serves to send money to China because it makes us more reliant on batteries and electric vehicle components that come from China. That serves to further hamper American energy and continue to drive up inflation. So we most certainly have regulatory overreach and executive branch problem right now.
Thank you. Mr. Brubaker?
I ran a car dealership for 35 years in Montgomery that employed 100 people. Nothing has a more smothering effect on small and medium-sized business than OSHA, EPA, and federal regulators. Small businesses do not have the legal resources to fight them, and they're expensive, they drive up costs, and for young people trying to get in the business, it makes the fence that much higher for them to get over to begin their careers. I mean, when I first got in the car business, if I'd been on my own, I don't know if the regulatory burden, I could have even met it. The EPA has been used as a weapon by the federal government to stifle American energy production. Look what the EPA's done on new fracking permit and even natural gas permits in Mobile Bay, all in the name of environmental protection when the political agenda is to drive people toward non-fossil fuel vehicles that frankly don't work and don't meet the needs of most Alabamians. The best thing we could do is deregulate American industry.
Thank you. Ms. Dobson, your 30-second rebuttal.
Yes, again, regulation is directly hurting Alabama families. It's driving up costs, and it's making it harder for small business owners to start their businesses, to comply with all of the regulatory mire that the Biden administration is issuing. In this regard, again, I'm the candidate who will fight against regulation. My opponent has voted to increase regulations for interior designers, for athletic trainers. We need someone who is going to fight against regulation, not increase it.
Mr. Brubaker?
Again, if you look at the ad she ran, everything that she's ever said about my record, she's misrepresented, including this. As a car dealer, believe me, I know a lot more about the effect of regulation on small business than a lawyer from Texas. But the bottom line is this. If we are going to improve Alabama's economy, we have got to make it possible for small business, the biggest job creators, to thrive. And with federal regulators coming in their door on any given day, you make that almost impossible.
Thank you.
We're going to move on now and discuss the Israel and Gaza conflict. There's been a lot of debate over the Israel and Gaza conflict and the aggressive approach taken by the government of Israel. Some are saying that they have gone too far. Do you support Israel's actions in Gaza, and what could or can the U.S. do to improve this situation as a whole? Mr. Brubaker, 60 seconds.
I absolutely support Israel's right to defend itself against terrorist attacks. They didn't make this happen. The terrorists in Gaza did. And sadly, the people in Gaza allowed these terrorists to live amongst them, put weapons in their hospitals, dig tunnels under their towns, and sadly, if you look at the reaction of people in Gaza when Israelis are killed, all the celebration, they're culpable. And Israel has an absolute right to protect itself. And the reason all this terrorism is happening right now in the Middle East is because of an American failure of leadership in Afghanistan. When we abandoned Afghanistan, when we had that disastrous pullout of Kabul, we gave the biggest breath of fresh air to every terrorist organization in the world and, frankly, dispirited our allies in the global war on terror. My son was there. We have got to find our moral compass and side with the good guys, which in this case is Israel.
Ms. Dobson, do you support Israel's tactics in Gaza?
Yes, I do. And we as Americans need to take a stronger stance in supporting Israel. That means four things. First of all, we need to stop undermining and second-guessing the actions that Israel's taken. Israel has to invade Rafah. They have to eradicate Hamas, and it's time that we allowed Israel to do what they need to do to keep their nation safe. Secondly, we have got to take a stronger stance towards Iran. Because of our withdrawal from Afghanistan, Iran is now the superpower in the Middle East, and the Biden administration just unfroze $10 billion worth of assets that Iran is using to fund terrorists. Thirdly, we need to defund the UN. It has proven that it is a systemically anti-Semitic institution that is not only issuing ceasefire resolutions, but is also supporting Hamas. And fourthly and finally, we have got to crack down on the anti-Semitism that is taking place on our own soil and is threatening and intimidating Alabama families.
Mr. Brubaker, your 30-second rebuttal.
It's not really a rebuttal. It's more of an addition. The Biden administration's trying to make everybody good in this fight is absurd. Every time he says something about Israel, you'll see, he say, well, you know, those people in Gaza, they're real good too, and here's $100 million for them. If we are going to lead a global fight on terror, we have to be clear about what our motives are. We cannot try to put Israel on the defensive just for defending their own territory, which is exactly what the Biden administration is doing.
Ms. Dobson, your final thought.
In 1943, the Alabama state legislature was the first to unanimously call for a nation state for Israel, and that's before World War II was over. We have a strong legacy of supporting Israel. We have many families here in District 2 of the Jewish faith and of Jewish heritage, and if you send me to Washington, I will not only stand with Israel, but ensure that we are fighting anti-Semitism on our own soil with President Trump, who expanded Title VI to include anti-Semitism as a type of hate crime.
At the end of 2025, major portions of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act will expire. This includes the expansion of the child tax credit, the increase in the standard deduction, and provisions lowering tax on small, family-owned, and privately held businesses. If Congress fails to act, there will be automatic tax increases on nearly every American. Do you support or oppose extending the 2017 tax changes? Why or why not? And is there anything you would do differently? Ms. Dobson, we'll start with you.
Unequivocally, yes. We have got to extend the Trump-era tax cuts and exemptions and extensions. This is key to ensuring that we can get the American economy up and running. This is key to ensuring that we can fight inflation. That is not enough, however. We also need to fight to fully and finally repeal the death tax. Here in District 2, so much of this district is rural lands, working lands. For about 40% of American working lands, they're going to change hands in the next 1 to 2 decades due to intergenerational transfer. For the average farm in America, over 90% of the assets are illiquid, meaning that we are going to experience fragmentation on a scale we've never seen if we don't fully and finally address the death tax and repeal it. So extending the tax cuts is just the start. We have also got to focus on repealing the death tax as well.
Thank you. Mr. Brubaker?
We need to do a lot more than just extend the Trump-era tax cuts. The biggest two economic booms in America came after large federal tax cuts, the Kennedy administration and Ronald Reagan's. If you want to see this economy take off, let people keep more of their own money. Let businesses keep more of their own profits. And you will encourage people to take risks, employ people, and build things. When it comes to the way we tax people in the United States, it's almost irrational. There is an assault on generational wealth. And I agree with my opponent. The federal government's obsession with making sure you cannot pass on generational wealth to your own children is counterproductive and just wrong. My grandfather had a farm of about 1,000 acres, raised hay, corn, and cattle. When he died, the only way to raise the money to pay the taxes was to sell the farm. And that's exactly what's happening to lots of families in rural Alabama. It's just wrong.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Ms. Dobson.
Yes, again, we have to fight tax increases of all kinds. And again, there's a distinction here because my opponent voted for the largest tax increase in Alabama history. I have shown that I will fight taxes tooth and nail and not only fight against tax increases, but fight for tax cuts. There is no organization in this state that fights against taxes more than the Alabama Forestry Association, and I'm the candidate they've chosen to endorse because they know that I will carry the anti-tax mantra to Washington, D.C. to fight for Alabama families.
Mr. Brubaker, 30 seconds.
Once again, another lie from my opponent. I voted to put the tax cut on the ballot so that people could vote on it. All of the votes that she calls me raising taxes were me putting local initiatives on the ballot so Alabamians could vote on them, which is the way democracy is supposed to work, as I recall. But on the issue of taxes in general, corporate America, not just individual, but we have the highest corporate tax rates in the world. And yet the Democrat Party is constantly arguing for higher corporate taxes. It's just got to stop.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached yet another break in this conversation. We will continue with our election 2024 District 2 Republican debate in 2 minutes. Thank you, candidates. You have an opportunity now to stand up and stretch your legs. Yes.
Welcome back, everyone, to our special election 2024 District 2 Republican debate. We are hearing from the candidates in the April 16th runoff. Let's continue with the questions.
And beginning now with transgender rights. Transgender rights have been a hot topic across the country in recent years, with strong feelings over issues regarding equal access to sporting events, restrooms, and medical care? Do you support equal rights for transgender athletes participating in sporting events and access to gender-affirming care for young people who identify as transgender? Mr. Brubaker, 60 seconds.
In the context of sports, I absolutely do not support them. Leah Thomas went from the 405th best male swimmer in the country to the leading female swimmer. It's not right to penalize young women who have trained and worked their whole lives to get athletic scholarships and excel in sports, to have someone who is biologically a man come in and compete with them on an unfair basis. Now, when you move this question over to transgender rights in the political sense, for adults, this is America, you can do what you want. But when it comes to children, having minors be encouraged by adults, especially adults outside their family, to have irreversible surgeries that will put them on strong medication for the rest of their lives, render them permanently sterile, is not a decision a young person can make. And when it comes to young people, teacher, leave those kids alone.
Ms. Dobson, do you support equal rights for members of the transgender community, and what are your thoughts on athletes participating in sporting events?
Look, I've got 2 little girls, and like many parents here in District 2, I am deeply concerned about the possibility that biological males could not only be competing with them in sports, but could be in their locker rooms, could be in their camp dorms. Look, gender is God-ordained and biologically determined. It's a reality. It's not an ideology. It's not a feeling, and we have to protect our children. A friend of mine shared a children's book that she had called Red, a crayon story about a red crayon that was really a blue crayon. Folks, the liberals are coming for our preschoolers, and we have to fight to ensure that girls' sports are for girls, girls' locker rooms are for biological girls only, and that again, we are protecting our kids, not only their physical bodies, but also their libraries, that there aren't sexually explicit materials in their libraries.
Mr. Brubaker, 30 seconds to respond.
In an address to other physicians, the head of surgery at Vanderbilt University encouraged other hospitals to get into transgender surgeries for minors because of the incredible amount of money that a hospital could make on it. That is the worst possible motive for any type of fraudulent health care. Very often, the people confusing children about their gender are people from outside their family, and they don't have to deal with the mental health issues that come later. This is a family issue. Children belong to their parents. They don't belong to the state, and that should be the end of it.
Ms. Dobson.
Yes, as I said earlier, parents are stewards of their children. Children are gifts from God, and it's up to us to protect them. And I will fight to ensure that no children will be subjected to hormone treatments or irreversible surgeries. This is child abuse, and I will fight to ensure that our children are protected from that type of abuse.
Well, thank you both. We have reached the end of our time for questioning now, but you are not clear just yet.
That's right. We want to give you 1 minute each for closing remarks, and we will start with you, Ms. Dotson.
Yes. As I've mentioned, I'm a mother raising my children here in this district. I'm so grateful to have been raised in rural Monroe County, Alabama. My parents always said, remember where you're from, and act accordingly. I am grateful for the values of hard work and humility that were instilled in me. And I think that we need more leaders in Washington who want to work. I am running not for a title, not because I don't have other opportunities, but because I'm deeply concerned about the country that our children are inheriting. I want a safer world for our children, and I want a more prosperous world, and a world where my kids can freely worship God. I have enjoyed being in your communities. I will show up for you in Washington. Please show up for me on April 16th and vote Caroline Dobson.
And Mr. Brubaker, your time now to remind voters why you feel they should vote for you.
I made a promise that I'd serve 2 terms in the state Senate and then leave. I kept that promise. But in 2018, I didn't believe the Republic was under threat for its very survival. But I do now. I want to run for Congress because we need someone who understands how the system works and has proven he can stop legislation that makes government bigger while at the same time making a smaller government more responsive to the needs of its citizens. Unlike my opponent, I have lived my entire adult life in Alabama. I raised 5 boys here. I've run a business for 35 years, employed over the years literally thousands of people. My family has 4 public schools named after my family in Montgomery because of the fact that we've reinvested in the community in which we lived. I didn't just move here. Elect me to Congress, and whether you live in Montgomery or Mobile or Phoenix City, I will give you the kind of representation you deserve.
Mr. Brubaker, Ms. Dobson, thank you for participating in this debate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just a reminder that the primary runoff is April 16th, and that will be ahead of the election in November. Again, this has been a joint effort between my station, Fox 10, here in Mobile, and WSFA in Montgomery. On behalf of myself and Valerie, we thank you both for your time.
The Alabama District 2 Republican Congressional Runoff Debate has been sponsored by All In Credit Union and Southern Cancer Center.